Get pulled into a vivid vortex of intense emotion, where every twist of the narrative leaves you breathless and wanting more. This is storytelling designed for the modern viewer who craves quality and cinematic depth. Hit subscribe now and don't get left behind in the storm of drama.
It was a Sunday afternoon when my mother sat across from me at the kitchen table and told me I was a disappointment. Not loudly. That was never her style. She said it the way she said everything. Measured, precise, with her hands folded in her lap like she was presenting findings at a board meeting. "I've been patient with you, Cora," she said. "Your father and I both have, but this is enough." I was 26 years old. I had just told her I was leaving my position at the firm. Let me back up. My mother, Dr. Elaine Sutton, built her career the way people build cathedrals, slowly, obsessively, with the understanding that it would outlast her. She was a cardiologist at Northwestern, a department head by 45, a name that appeared on plaques in hospital lobbies and inside the covers of medical journals. My father, Robert, was a corporate attorney. Not flashy, but the kind of steady, expensive lawyer that old Chicago families kept on retainer for decades. They had met in graduate school, married at 29, and built a life that looked, from the outside, like a proof of concept. A demonstration that discipline plus sacrifice equals permanence. And then there was me. Their plan for me was not subtle. Law school, they said, because medicine required a certain emotional detachment they had long suspected I lacked. I was too soft, my mother explained once. Too easily moved by things. A liability in an operating room, she said. Though she did not say it unkindly, she said it the way you tell a child they're not built for a sport. Factual. So law it was. I did what I was supposed to do. I got into Northwestern. I graduated. I took a position at a mid-size firm in the Loop doing contract review, which is exactly as thrilling as it sounds. I was 24, making decent money, living in a one-bedroom in Wicker Park, and I was hollowed out. The thing nobody tells you about a life that looks correct from the outside is how loud the silence gets on the inside. At night, after the billable hours were logged and the emails were answered, I would sit at my kitchen table with my laptop and do the only thing that made my brain feel quiet. I built spreadsheets. Not for work, I mean models. Financial models, market maps, trend analyses for small food businesses. I had started doing it 2 years earlier, almost by accident, after a neighbor mentioned she couldn't figure out why her catering company kept bleeding money despite being fully booked. I spent a weekend with her numbers and found it immediately. She was underpricing her labor by 30% and had no system for tracking ingredient waste. Simple stuff, if you knew where to look. She cried when I showed her. Not from sadness, from relief. I kept doing it. Quietly. For free at first, then for small fees, then for slightly larger fees. I built a spreadsheet template for a bakery owner I met at a farmer's market. I helped a food truck operator restructure her pricing. I built a cost analysis model for a restaurant that was trying to survive its second location. I was doing this on weekends, on evenings, on lunch breaks. I was not sleeping enough. I didn't care. I told my mother about it once, cautiously, the way you test ice before you step onto it. I told her I thought I wanted to do this full-time. Help small food businesses survive. Build systems for people who were brilliant at cooking but drowning in numbers. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Cora, running numbers for people who sell sandwiches is not a career. It's a hobby with delusions." I didn't bring it up again. Not for 8 months. Then I turned 26, and something shifted. I had just gotten off a call with a restaurant owner named Patrice. A woman who had put everything she had into a small Haitian spot in Logan Square. Patrice had been 3 weeks from closing. I had spent 40 hours rebuilding her financial model, renegotiating her supplier costs on paper, drafting a proposal she could take to a community lender. She called me to say she'd gotten the bridge loan. She was staying open. She started crying on the phone, and I stood in the hallway outside my office in my blazer and my good shoes, and I cried too, quietly, where no one could see me. And then, I walked back to my desk and spent the next 4 hours reviewing indemnification clauses in a commercial lease agreement. That was the moment I knew. I gave my 2 weeks' notice the following Monday. I told my mother on a Sunday, which in retrospect was a mistake, because Sundays at the Sutton house were sacred in the wrong way. Slow and airless, and full of loaded silences. "I've been patient with you," she said, hands folded, voice steady. "But this is enough. You have a career. A real one. You have a future that your father and I worked very hard to make possible. And you want to walk away from it to, what? Make spreadsheets for taco stands?" "They're not taco stands," I said. And even as I said it, I knew it was the wrong thing to fixate on. "Cora." Her voice dropped half a degree. "I am telling you that if you do this, we're done. I will not watch you throw your life away. I will not fund it, I will not support it, and I will not pretend to be at peace with it. If you leave that firm, you leave this family." I think she expected me to fold. I had always folded before. The whole architecture of our relationship was built on me eventually folding. I didn't fold. I said, "Okay," and I meant it, and I watched something move across her face. Not anger exactly, but a cold surprise, like she had reached for a railing and found nothing there. I drove home with the windows down even though it was 40 degrees. I needed the cold. I needed to feel something real and immediate and mine. Have you ever been told that the thing you love most is embarrassing? That your instincts are wrong and your judgment is childish, and your passion is a phase you need to grow out of? If you have, leave a comment. I read everyone. I want to know I'm not alone in this. The first month was hard in a way I hadn't fully prepared for. Not financially. I had savings, and my freelance work was already generating enough to cover rent. Hard in the quiet way. Hard in the way of a person who has just jumped off a bridge and is waiting to find out if the water is shallow. I sublet a desk at a co-working space in Pilsen, which was close enough to Logan Square that I could walk to Patrice's restaurant on good days and eat her soups and remind myself why I was doing this. I worked 14-hour days. I took on 6 clients in the first 2 months, then 9. I built out a service structure. Not just financial modeling, but full operational audits, pricing architecture, supplier negotiation frameworks. I hired a part-time contractor, a young woman named Bex, who had dropped out of a business program and knew her way around a database like it was her first language. The thing about working with small food businesses is that the stakes are intimate in a way corporate work never is. When a merger falls apart, someone's portfolio takes a hit. When a restaurant closes, someone's dream disappears. Someone's family loses its income. Someone's neighborhood loses a place that mattered. I felt the weight of it, and that weight made me sharper, not softer. 8 months in, I landed a project I almost turned down because it scared me. A regional food incubator was looking for someone to build an evaluation framework. A system for assessing which early-stage food businesses in underserved communities were most likely to survive with the right support. They had funding from 3 foundations. They needed rigorous methodology. They needed it to be replicable, transparent, and defensible. I spent 3 months on it. I barely left my apartment on weekends. Bex and I worked through 2 holiday weekends, and one genuinely miserable stretch in January, where the heat in my building broke, and we both worked in coats. When we delivered the framework, the incubator's director emailed me the next morning to say it was the most thorough assessment tool they had ever seen. 6 weeks later, they referred me to a national foundation that was building a food equity fund. The foundation wanted to launch a venture arm, a small fund that would make equity investments in food businesses, led by women and people of color, in underserved markets. They needed someone to architect the investment evaluation model and serve as a consulting director for the first cycle. The contract they sent me was for $400,000 over 18 months. I sat with that email open on my screen for a long time. I kept rereading the number. 400,000. Not life-changing money, not by itself, but the beginning of something that could be. I signed it. I kept working. What came after that moved faster than I have words for cleanly. The fund's first cycle generated results that nobody had predicted. Not because we were lucky, but because the evaluation model was good, and the businesses we selected were extraordinary and had simply never had access to patient capital before. 2 of our cohort companies were acquired within 14 months. One landed a national retail partnership. The foundation's board voted to expand the fund, triple the capital, and bring me on as a permanent equity partner. Somewhere in there, I moved to Asheville. I hadn't planned to. I had gone for a long weekend to visit a friend, and I drove around the first morning and felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't even known was tight. The mountains, the light, the specific quality of the air in late October. I pulled over on a road above the city and sat with my engine off and thought, I could think here. I went home, finished a project, and started making calls. The property I found was outside the city limits, tucked into a hillside, a converted farmhouse with a barn that had been partially renovated into an office space. It sat on 11 acres. It had a creek running along the south boundary. It was not cheap, $6.2 million, which was most of what I had, but it had a separate studio space with north-facing skylights and enough room to eventually house a small team. And when I stood in the barn on a Thursday afternoon in November and watched the light move across the concrete floor, I knew it was mine. The art form comparison is not exact. Nobody wrote a feature on me. What happened was quieter. I was mentioned in a foundation report, then in a trade piece about food equity investing, then in a newsletter that a lot of people in the impact investment world apparently read. My inbox got strange. Old colleagues from the firm in Chicago sent polite, curious emails. A professor who had told me my ambitions were soft wrote to congratulate me, which I found interesting. And then, 4 months after I moved to Asheville, my brother called. His name is Garrett. He's 3 years older than me, and he has always been the one who got it right. The right schools, the right job at our father's firm's affiliated practice, the right apartment in Lincoln Park, the right wife, the right trajectory. We had not spoken since before I left the law firm, not because of a fight, exactly. Because I had stopped calling and he had not noticed enough to start. His voice when I picked up was the one he used with clients. Warm in the way of something practiced. Cora, he said. Hey stranger, how are you? I waited. I saw the piece, he said. In that newsletter, Mom showed it to me. He paused. You're doing really well. Thank you, I said. I mean it, genuinely impressed. Another pause. Listen, I wanted to. I've been thinking about you a lot, actually. It's been too long. We were talking, me and Mom and Dad, and we thought it would be great to come down and see you. See the new place. We could all fly down, spend a few days, really reconnect. Reconnect. I held the phone and looked out the window at the creek. Sure, I said. Come down. I said it flatly without warmth because I already knew what this was. I had known from the second he said Mom showed it to me. They had not called when I resigned. They had not called when I sublet my desk in Pilsen and worked through that miserable January in a coat. They had not checked whether I was okay, or afraid, or failing, or fine. But now there was a newsletter. Now there was a farmhouse on 11 acres. Now there was something they could measure. They arrived on a Saturday. My mother, my father, and Garrett stepped out of a rental car in my gravel driveway looking profoundly out of place. Not because they were dressed wrong exactly, but because they belonged to a world that was paved and rectangular, and this place was neither. My mother looked at the farmhouse for a long moment before she looked at me. "Well," she said, "it's rustic." "I love it," I said. I gave them the tour. I watched my mother's eyes move through rooms, the way her eyes always move through things. Cataloging, assessing, running internal calculations. She touched the kitchen counters. She looked at the barn studio. She stood in the doorway of the main workspace and looked at the long table where Bex and I worked, the whiteboards covered in frameworks and timelines, the north light coming through the skylights. "This is where you work," she said. "This is where we work," I said. We had lunch at the farmhouse table. Food from a place in town, local and good, nothing catered, nothing impressive by their standards. My father made conversation about the drive from the airport. Garrett talked about a project at the firm. My mother rearranged things on the table that didn't need rearranging. Then my father set down his fork. "We want to talk to you about something," he said. I looked at him. His face was the face he used in negotiations, steady, reasonable, the posture of someone about to make a sensible proposal. "Garrett has been thinking about going independent," he said. "Starting his own practice. He has the clients, he has costs, office, space, staff, liability coverage. The transition period. It's significant. We thought, given where you are now." He gestured in a way that I think was meant to encompass the farmhouse, the acreage, the newsletter, the fund, all of it. "We thought you might consider coming in as a capital partner. A family investment." I looked at Garrett. He was looking at his plate the way he had looked at report cards that didn't go well, the particular stillness of someone waiting for the room to settle. My mother spoke then, smoothly the way she always tagged in when the room needed recalibrating. "You have done so well, Cora. Really, we're proud of you, and family supports each other. That's what we've always believed." I almost laughed, not meanly, just, I couldn't help it. The audacity of that last sentence, delivered with such perfect calm. By the woman who had sat across from me at this same kind of Sunday table and told me I was throwing my life away. I let the silence sit. I had learned to do that. Silence is information. Let it breathe and people fill it with truth. Then I said, "That's not what I remember you believing." My mother's expression didn't change. "Cora, you told me you were done," I said. My voice was level. I was surprised by how level it was. "You told me if I left the firm, I was leaving this family. Those were your words. I left the firm. Neither of you called for 14 months. We needed time, my father," I said. "At the time. When it was hard, not now." Garrett looked up from his plate. He opened his mouth and closed it again. "I'm not angry," I told them, and I meant that too, which was the strangest part. I wasn't angry. I was clear. There's a difference, and I had spent 2 years learning to tell them apart. Anger is heat. Clarity is a completely different temperature. I understand how you see the world. I grew up in your house. I know the model. You invest in people when the return looks promising, and you pull back when the risk looks too high. I was a high-risk asset, and you cut the position. That's actually rational, from inside your framework." My mother made a sound that was the beginning of a protest. "But I don't live in that framework anymore," I said. I looked out the window at the line of trees along the creek. "The work I do now, the whole point of it is the existing model for who gets investment and who doesn't is broken. It's designed to protect people who already have everything, and exclude people who have something real but no track record that the model recognizes. I built a different model. One that actually looks at what's there." I turned back to them. And what was there with me? What was always there? Was someone who knew how to see the thing inside the numbers. "You just never ran that evaluation." My father was quiet. My mother had gone very still. Garrett was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face before. I couldn't quite name it. Something between recognition and something older. "I'm not going to invest in Garrett's practice," I said. "Not because I don't have the capital, and not because I don't want good things for him, but because this conversation is not actually about Garrett. It's about you coming to me now, after the newsletter, after the farmhouse, and deciding that I'm a good bet after all. And I am not a bank that's been waiting for you to apply." I stood up. "The guest rooms are ready if you want to stay tonight. The drive back to the airport is about 40 minutes. I picked up my plate. "I'd like you to make that choice before dinner." My father stood too. He looked at me for a long moment. Really looked, in a way that he hadn't, maybe ever. I didn't look away. Then he nodded once, and went to find my mother's coat. They left before 4 o'clock. Garrett paused at the door. He looked like he was about to say something that might actually be real. And then he didn't, and then he was gone. I stood on the porch until the car disappeared down the gravel road, and then I went inside and stood in the kitchen for a while doing nothing. Just breathing. Just listening to the creek. That was 11 months ago. The fund is now in its 3rd cycle. We have capital commitments from 4 foundations and 2 family offices. Bex is no longer a contractor. She's a partner, and she's brilliant, and she drives me crazy in the best possible way. We hired 2 analysts last spring, both of them women who came from backgrounds that the traditional finance pipeline would have found unimpressive, and I found immediately interesting. Last month, we funded our 31st business. Most days I work from the barn, in the north light, with the doors open when the weather allows. There is a woman named Frances, who runs a pie business out of Asheville and comes by on Thursdays to drop off a sample of whatever she's testing, and to talk through her numbers. There is a man named Paul who converted a shipping container into a spice operation, and calls me from his van on Tuesdays. There is a network of people I have built who are doing extraordinary, quiet, unsexy, essential things in kitchens and markets and converted warehouses, and I am part of that now in a way that no amount of contract review ever made me feel. My mother emailed me in the spring. A short note. She said she had read another piece about the fund, and that it was clear I had found my path. She said she hoped I was well. She didn't ask for anything. I read it twice. I thought about her for a long time. Then I wrote back 3 sentences. I said I was well. I said the work was meaningful. I said I hoped she was too. That's where we are. Not close, not repaired, not the kind of reconciled that makes for a tidy ending, but I don't need a tidy ending. I need the creak sound in the morning, and the light through the skylights, and the stack of intake forms from businesses that someone told were too small to matter. I need to be here, in the life I built from the wreckage of the one I was supposed to have. So what about you? What did someone tell you that you couldn't do? What did you walk away from, or toward? Tell me in the comments. I'll be there.